She was just a maid. A nameless servant in his grand estate. A woman who cleaned the floors he walked on, invisible to his world of power and control. Until one fateful night. He found her in his private study, holding a blood-stained letter. A letter no one should have ever seen. His voice was like a blade. "Put that down. Now." She turned, fear flickering in her eyes. "I didn't mean to. You've seen too much." His grip tightened on her wrist. He should have fired her. Thrown her out of his life forever. Instead, he crushed his lips against hers. That night, Damien Knight made his greatest mistake. He fell in love. A man who feels nothing until her. Damien Knight was a man without a heart. A billionaire CEO feared by his enemies, respected by the world. He built his empire with ruthless precision, never letting anything or anyone distract him. Then why couldn't he stop watching her? She was just a maid. A quiet, delicate thing that moved through his mansion like a ghost. She never looked him in the eyes. Never spoke unless spoken to. But then came that night. The night that changed everything. One stormy night, Damien walked into his dimly lit library. The air smelled of rain, the fire crackling low in the hearth. And there she was, standing by the window, her slender frame outlined by the lightning flashing across the sky. Her fingers trembled against the glass. "You don't belong here," he said coldly. She startled, turning to face him. But then something strange. Instead of looking away, she held his gaze. "Neither do you," she whispered. For the first time in years, Damien felt unsettled. He should have fired her then. Should have sent her away before she became a distraction. But he didn't. Because something about her silence screamed louder than words. Days passed. He started noticing her more. The way she moved, the way she avoided him, like she was hiding something. Then, one fateful night, Damien walked into his study and froze. She was standing at his desk, her delicate fingers gripping a letter. A letter stained with blood. His heart pounded. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" She gasped, dropping the paper as if it had burned her. I wasn't. Liar." He crossed the room in seconds, trapping her against the mahogany desk. His hands pressed into the wood beside her. His breath warm against her skin. Her chest rose and fell rapidly. Fear. Panic. And something else, something dangerous. "You shouldn't have seen that," he murmured, his voice dark. I didn't mean to. But you did." His gaze flickered to her trembling lips. "And now you belong to me." The next morning everything changed. She wasn't just a maid anymore. "You work for me now. Personally." Her breath hitched. "What does that mean?" "It means you serve only me." Damien leaned in, his fingers grazing her jaw. "And in return, I'll keep your secret." Her eyes widened. "My secret?" A smirk ghosted his lips. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" Her pulse pounded. He knew. He knew everything. What happens next? A past she's been running from collides with the danger he's been hiding. A passionate obsession turns into something much darker. And when the truth comes out, one of them might not survive. Evelyn woke up to the sound of heavy rain pounding against the glass windows. Her heart was still racing from last night. A kiss. The way his hands had claimed her. The way his icy blue eyes had burned into hers as if she belonged to him. She had pushed him away. But the look on Damien's face. It wasn't rejection. It was possession. And now she was trapped. A knock at her door made her jump. She opened it cautiously, only to find a tall man in a dark suit. One of Damien's guards. "The boss wants you in his office." Now. Her stomach twisted. Cliffhanger 1. A dangerous proposal. Evelyn stood in Damien's grand office, her hands clenched into fists. He leaned back in his chair, watching her with unreadable eyes. "You're not just a maid, are you?" Her breath caught. His smirk was slow, dark. "I know everything, Evelyn." She shook her head. I don't know what you mean." You were in my study last night. You saw that letter. And now you're mine. Her pulse pounded. You can't just work for me. Not as a maid. As my personal assistant. Her lips parted. Why would you want me for that? Damien stood, stepping closer. His presence swallowed the room. Because now that you've seen what you shouldn't have. His fingers brushed against her wrist, his touch searing. You don't have a choice. Evelyn swallowed hard. She should refuse. Should run. But something in his eyes told her, if she said no, he wouldn't let her go. And worse. A part of her didn't want to leave. That night, Evelyn was no longer a maid. She wore a sleek black dress, far from the dull uniform she was used to. Damien had sent it to her himself, along with a note. Be ready at 8. I don't tolerate disobedience. The event was a high-profile gala. Billionaires. Power players. The kind of world she didn't belong to. And yet, Damien's hand never left the small of her back. His touch was possessive, as if marking her in front of everyone. You look beautiful, he murmured against her ear. Her breath hitched. Why are you doing this? He turned her to face him. His eyes dark with something dangerous. Because I don't share what's mine. Before she could react, a voice interrupted. Damien Knight. I never thought I'd see you with a maid. Evelyn turned sharply. A stunning blonde woman stood before them. Her red lips curved into a cruel smirk. Damien's grip on Evelyn's waist tightened. His voice was dangerously calm. Ava. The woman's eyes flicked to Evelyn. Does she know? Evelyn stiffened. Know what? Ava laughed softly, tilting her head. Oh, sweetheart. He hasn't told you, has he? Damien's jaw clenched. That's enough, Ava. But it was too late. The seed of doubt had already been planted. The secret that could break them. Later that night, back at the mansion, Evelyn turned to Damien, her chest tight. What did she mean? What haven't you told me? For the first time, Damien hesitated. A flicker of something almost like pain crossed his features. Go to bed, Evelyn. She stepped closer. Damien. His hand shot out, gripping her wrist. His voice was low, almost desperate. Don't ask questions you don't want answers to. A chill ran down her spine. Because in that moment, she realized. Whatever Damien was hiding, it wasn't just dangerous. Could destroy them both. The next morning, Evelyn stood in front of the mansion's enormous glass windows, watching the rain fall. Her mind was restless. Who was Ava to Damien? And more importantly, what was he hiding? She turned as footsteps approached. It was Thomas, the head of Damien's security. A man built like a wall, with dark eyes that never missed a thing. You should leave while you still can, he said quietly. Evelyn's breath caught. What? Thomas stepped closer, lowering his voice. You don't know what you've gotten yourself into. Damien, he's dangerous. And not in the way you think. Her heart pounded. Not in the way I think. Before she could ask more, a deep voice interrupted. Thomas. Damien stood at the top of the stairs. His expression like ice. Thomas straightened. Sir. Damien's piercing blue eyes locked onto Evelyn. My office. Now. Evelyn swallowed hard. Whatever this was. It wasn't over. What is Damien's darkest secret? Evelyn stood in Damien's office, her arms crossed. You're keeping something from me, she said, her voice firm. Damien leaned against his desk, watching her with dark amusement. And what makes you think you deserve the truth? Her pulse raced. Because I didn't ask for any of this. You pulled me into your world. Now tell me why. Something flashed in his eyes. Something raw. He pushed off the desk, stepping closer. You really want to know, Evelyn? He took a step back. Yes. He didn't answer. Not with words. Instead, he grabbed her wrist, pulling her flush against him. His breath was warm against her cheek. His fingers tightening on her waist. This is why, he murmured before his lips crashed against hers. The kiss was not gentle. It was fire and control, passion and possession. A war between them, one she wasn't sure she wanted to win. Evelyn gasped as Damien's hands tangled in her hair, tilting her head back, deepening the kiss. Then, suddenly, he pulled away. His breathing was uneven. His blue eyes dark with something dangerous. "This is what you do to me," he muttered. Evelyn's heart pounded. But before she could say a word, his phone rang. Damien's jaw clenched as he glanced at the screen. His expression turned to stone. Evelyn barely had time to react before he grabbed his coat. "I have to go." Who was on the other end of the call? Hours passed. Damien didn't return. Evelyn paced the mansion, nerves eating at her. Then her phone buzzed. Text. From an unknown number. "If you love your life, leave Damien night before it's too late." Her blood ran cold. She turned, only to find Ava standing in the doorway, arms crossed, a wicked smirk on her lips. "Looks like you're finally starting to understand," Ava said softly. Evelyn clenched her fists. "Understand what?" Ava stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Damien isn't just a billionaire. He isn't just ruthless." She leaned in, her voice like a whisper of poison. "He's a killer, darling. And if you're not careful, you'll be next." Is Damien hiding a darker truth? Evelyn's hands were ice cold as she clenched her phone. Her breath came in sharp gasps, but she forced herself to meet Ava's gaze. "You're lying." Ava arched a perfectly shaped brow. "Am I?" She stepped closer, her red satin dress whispering against the marble floor. "You think Damien loves you," she whispered mockingly. "You're just a new obsession. And trust me, darling, his obsessions always end in destruction." Evelyn's heart pounded against her ribs. "Well, Damien would never. Would he?" Ava smiled, as if reading her mind. "Ask him about the warehouse incident 5 years ago. See what he tells you." She turned on her heel, walking away with the elegance of a queen who had already won. Evelyn swallowed hard. She had 2 choices: run, or fight for the truth. And running had never been her style. What happened at the warehouse 5 years ago? Damien didn't return that night. Evelyn tossed and turned in his massive bed, the silk sheets cool against her restless skin. The mansion felt different. Well, every shadow seemed darker. Every creak of the floorboards sent a chill down her spine. At 2:34 a.m., her phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. "I warned you. He's not who you think he is. Leave before you end up like the others." The others? Her fingers trembled as she typed back. "Who are you?" No reply. She exhaled shakily, pushing the blankets off her. She couldn't sleep. Not when a storm of secrets was crashing down around her. She needed answers. And she knew exactly where to start. Damien's office. What secrets are hidden in Damien's office? The office was dark, except for the moonlight filtering through the towering windows. Evelyn hesitated before stepping inside. Her bare feet silent on the cold marble floor. Everything looked normal. The expensive leather chair. The antique whiskey decanter. The heavy bookshelves filled with business and law books. But then, her eyes landed on the desk. More specifically, the locked drawer. Her heartbeat quickened. She reached for the handle. Her gaze darted around. If Damien had a secret, it had to be here. Then, her eyes fell on the top shelf. Glass case. Inside, an old key. She bit her lip. Could it be? She reached up, her fingers brushing against the cold glass. Crash. The case shattered as she grabbed the key, glass shards falling around her. Heart hammering, she shoved the key into the lock and turned it. The drawer slid open. Inside there was a black leather folder. Worn. Filled with secrets. She flipped it open. And her breath stopped. Because staring back at her were photos. Damien. Standing in front of a burning warehouse. Blood on his hands. A man's lifeless body at his feet. And scrawled at the bottom of the photo. Warehouse incident. 5 years ago. Evelyn's hands shook. A voice cut through the silence. Dangerous. Standing right behind her. You shouldn't have done that, Evelyn. She whirled around. Damien stood in the doorway. His icy blue eyes weren't just cold. They were lethal. Will Damien tell Evelyn the truth? Or silence her forever? Damien stepped forward. His powerful frame casting a long shadow across the room. The golden light from the desk lamp flickered, highlighting the sharp edges of his jawline. Evelyn's pulse pounded in her ears. Damien, what is this? Her voice came out in a whisper, barely audible over the storm raging outside. His gaze flicked to the open drawer. The shattered glass. The black folder still clutched in her hands. For the first time since she met him, Damien looked dangerous. Put it down. His voice was eerily calm, but there was an unmistakable warning beneath it. Evelyn swallowed hard. Just tell me the truth. What happened 5 years ago? Silence. Damien took another step forward, and she instinctively took one back. You don't want to know, he said finally, his tone dark and heavy. Evelyn clenched her fists. I already do. She held up the photo. I know you were there, Damien. I know. In a flash, he closed the distance between them. Before she could react, he grabbed her wrist, forcing her to drop the folder. The papers scattered across the floor like fallen secrets. His grip wasn't painful, but it was unyielding. His jaw was tight, his chest rising and falling in controlled breaths. I warned you, he said, his voice dangerously low. You should have stayed out of this. Will Damien reveal the truth? Or is she in more danger than she realized? Evelyn's breath hitched. They were so close. Too close. His fingers still circled her wrist, but his grip had loosened. His eyes burned into hers, a storm of emotions flickering behind them. Anger, frustration, something else. Her heart pounded as she whispered, If you want to keep lying to me, then let me go. Damien didn't move. Didn't speak. Instead, his free hand rose to cup her face. His touch was rough, yet unbearably gentle. Evelyn. His voice was hoarse, as if fighting something he didn't want to say. She should pull away. She should run. But she didn't. Because in that moment, with the storm howling outside and his secrets hanging between them, he kissed her. It wasn't slow. It wasn't hesitant. It was desperate, consuming, like a man trying to hold on to the one thing that could still save him. Evelyn melted into him, her fingers gripping the lapels of his suit. For a moment, the danger, the secrets, none of it mattered. But then, a loud bang echoed through the mansion. Who just entered the mansion? And are they here to kill Damien? Damien's head snapped toward the door. His entire body tensed. Predatory, lethal. Evelyn gasped, gripping his arm. What was that? Then footsteps. Fast. Heavy. Not alone. Damien shoved Evelyn behind him just as the office door burst open. 3 men in black stormed inside. Armed. Faces hidden behind masks. Night, one of them growled. We warned you. Evelyn's blood ran cold. Damien didn't flinch. Instead he smirked. Dark, knowing smirk. As if I'd let you walk out of here alive. A gunshot rang out. Evelyn screamed. The world exploded into chaos. Who was shot, and will Evelyn survive the night? A gunshot echoed through the mansion. Evelyn screamed, but Damien shielded her with his body. The masked assassins stormed into the office. We warned you, Knight. But Damien, he just smirked, because no one touches what belongs to him. Damien moved like lightning. Before the next bullet could fire, he lunged, knocking over a chair and sending papers flying. Evelyn's breath came in sharp gasps as she stumbled back. Her heart thundered in her chest. One of the masked men raised his gun, aiming at Damien. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Without thinking, Evelyn threw herself forward. The gunshot exploded in the room. She felt the force of Damien's body crash against hers, shielding her completely. For a moment, silence. Then, Damien's voice. Low, urgent. Evelyn. Look at me. She blinked, her vision blurry with fear. You're hit, she choked out. His strong hands cupped her face. I'm fine, he whispered. His thumb brushed against her cheek, wiping away a tear she hadn't even realized had fallen. His gaze burned into hers, so intense, so full of something she wasn't sure she deserved. But if anything happened to you, I'd burn this world down. And then he kissed her. Not like before. Not like a man trying to hold back. This kiss was raw, desperate. Promise. Wow. And Evelyn. She kissed him back because nothing else in the world mattered more than him. Will they survive this night? Or will love slip through their fingers? The assassins. Damien had handled it. He always did. But now he stood by the grand mansion window. His hands shoved into his pockets, staring out into the storm. Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed, watching him. He was untouchable, ruthless, a man feared by the world. But tonight he looked tired, like a man who had almost lost the one thing he cared about. Evelyn swallowed hard. You don't have to do this alone, Damien. His shoulders stiffened. You don't understand, Evelyn. The things I've done. If you stay with me, you'll never be safe. She stood up and walked to him, slowly, fearlessly. And then, she did the one thing no one else had ever dared. She took his face in her hands. His sharp jaw clenched beneath her touch. But he didn't pull away. She traced her fingers along the scar near his temple. The one he never talked about. The one that whispered a story of a man who had survived too much. I don't care about your past, she whispered. I care about who you are with me. His breath shuddered. And in that moment he broke. Damien wrapped his arms around her, crushing her against his chest. She felt his heart hammering beneath her palms. And when he spoke, it wasn't the voice of a ruthless billionaire. It was the voice of a man who had finally found home. Stay. Always. 1 year later. The mansion looked different now. Brighter. Filled with warmth. Evelyn stood on the balcony, the golden sunlight dancing across her skin. A soft breeze played with her hair. And behind her, strong arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her back against a broad chest. Mrs. Knight, Damien murmured against her ear. His voice full of love and possession. Evelyn smiled. She turned in his embrace, cupping his face, brushing her lips against his. No secrets, no fear, just them. Are you happy? She asked. Damien's icy blue eyes softened in a way only she had ever seen. I have you, he said. I have everything. And then he kissed her. The billionaire who had once thought he was too broken to love had finally found the one thing he could never let go.